In Greek mythology, the Trojan princess Cassandra was cursed by the gods with the gift of prophecy, the gift of foreseeing the future. Why was this gift a curse? Well, it was because that whatever it was that she saw, she was unable to change it. Whomever she told, they just wouldn't believe her, and no matter how loudly she shouted her warnings from the rooftops, she was always ignored. The Cassandra in this story is a group of local Portuguese residents who, in January of 2001, took to the streets of their small town to protest about the condition of the Hintze Ribeiro bridge, warning of the structural degradation that was visible to anyone who cared to look. They too were ignored, and just a few weeks later, on the night of March the 4th, 2001, the bridge collapsed, leading to Portugal's worst ever road disaster. The Hintze Ribeiro Bridge was situated some 50 kilometres upstream from Portugal's second largest city, Porto. Located in the Douro Valley just south of the little town of Entre os Rios, it spanned the river just downstream from where the Rio Tamega joins the Rio Douro on a wide, sweeping bend. Construction of the Hintze Ribeiro Bridge had begun in 1884 and it took 3 years to complete. The construction method used was that of load-bearing pillars and a rigid deck structure. In this case, 6 granite pillars supported a latticed steel box section that, in turn, supported a concrete roadway. The bridge was 336 metres long and it was around 50 metres above the river in the middle section. The bridge was in constant use over the next 110 years or so, and saw its traffic change from horses and stagecoaches to cars and buses. The bridge was damaged by explosives during the monarchist revolution of 1919, but seeing as the rebels failed to demolish the bridge, it was able to be repaired and was put back into service. After this, it was only closed twice, once in 1959 to widen the roadway surface, and once again in 1990 to repair and resurface the upper deck. These remedial works did not, however, prevent the population and local officials from calling for further inspections and repair work on the bridge a few years later, as it was beginning to show some worrying signs of deterioration. Indeed, in 1999, the mayor of Entre os Rios had publicly stated that, "We hope that a tragedy will not be necessary for the new bridge to be built." Again, this warning went unheeded, as did the public demonstrations of January 2001. Now, January and February of 2001 were especially wet months, with the region around Entre os Rios and the Douro Valley in general suffering flood after flood after flood. Eventually, a critical point was reached. On the night of March 4, 2001, just after 9 in the evening, one of the central granite pillars supporting the bridge collapsed into the raging waters of the Douro River, dragging the whole of the central section of the upper deck down with it. Crossing the bridge at that time were 3 cars and a tour bus filled with passengers. In a few moments of what must have been just sheer terror, these unfortunate souls were thrown from the relative comfort of their vehicles into the freezing black torrent of the raging Douro River. Firemen and rescue services were on the scene within minutes, but in the pitch black of night and with the river flowing in full spate, there wasn't much they could do apart from comb the riverbanks downstream in the hope of finding any survivors. As the day dawned, the true scale of the tragedy began to be seen for the first time. The river continued to flow at a frightening rate, and the image of the bridge looked like it had been taken from a film. During that day, everything was done to find someone, but unfortunately only one body was found. Army frogmen risked their own lives diving into the raging river, searching in vain to locate any trapped victims, but it quickly became apparent that searching for victims was just too dangerous. The divers themselves were having to be rescued, as the strong underwater currents made it impossible for anyone to be in the water with any degree of safety. Rescue teams were forced to watch in frustration from the riverbanks as the muddy water rushed by below. Over the next few days, the water began to subside, and then on March the 8th, bodies began to be washed ashore on the Spanish coast of Galicia, more than 150 kilometres away. Initially, rescuers thought that this had nothing to do with the tragedy at Entre os Rios, but ID on these bodies confirmed that they were in fact some of the passengers from the Azadouro tourist coach. They'd been swept all the way down the Douro River, right through the middle of Porto city centre and out into the Atlantic Ocean. Over the following weeks, several more bodies from the accident were washed ashore along the beaches of northern Portugal and Spain. Finally, on March the 19th, over 2 weeks after the collapse, the Azadouro tourist coach was found about 120 metres downstream from the fallen bridge. Rescuers braced themselves for the final retrieval of the victims, but of the 53 people known to have been on board, only 6 bodies remained, such was the force of the water. On April the 2nd, the first car was recovered, the bodies of 2 people were still inside. On April the 7th, a second car was recovered, but it was empty. And finally, on June 19th, some 3.5 months later, the third car was recovered, containing the bodies of a further 3 people. The official death toll is given as 59, with 36 of the victims never having been found. Some reports list the death toll as 70, although I was unable to find out where this number comes from. Now, if you do a quick search on the internet about this tragedy, you'll find some old news reports which state that one of the central pillars of the old bridge was simply swept away during a heavy rainstorm, taking the road deck with it. Now, that's kind of correct, but it's a bit of an oversimplification, and it certainly isn't the whole story. Look at this photograph from 1909 showing the bridge during the worst recorded flood in memory. At its height, the water was just 3 metres below the road surface, right up to the top of the pillars, and yet the bridge didn't collapse. No pillar was just swept away. To understand why the Hintze Ribeiro bridge was eventually doomed to fail, we have to delve back in time and have a look at the original plans and some old photographs. On the original plans, notice how it's only pillars 2 and 3 that are actually in the water. The first pillar is on the bedrock, pillars 2 and 3 are in the river itself, and 4, 5 and 6 are dug deep into a massive sandbank which had formed on the inside bend of the river. Here's an old photograph showing the full span of the bridge, and you can clearly see that there are only 2 pillars in the water during a period of normal flow. Now, in this picture, taken in 1981, there are noticeable differences. This photo shows the view from just upstream of the bridge, and the 3 leftmost pillars are the ones which, in previous shots, had been buried deep into that massive sandbank. Now, there's 2 things here. Firstly, by 1981, a large proportion of that sandbank is just gone. 2 pillars, the ones which would be numbers 4 and 5 on the plans, are now almost completely exposed. And pillar 4 is now in the water, whereas before it was buried in the sand. Secondly, notice how that the pillar to the right, pillar number 3, has got its base covered in a giant pile of loose rock. Now, that's not the foundation. That piled up rock is called riprap, and it's there to protect the pillar from what's known as scour. The definition of erosional scour is given as the action of scouring or the state of being scoured, especially by swift-flowing water. Basically what that means is that as fast-flowing water moves around a submerged pillar, the vortices which are formed behind the pillar eat away at the riverbed, leaving behind a deep hole which eventually can undermine the foundation itself. The original designers knew this, and so they piled up riprap around the 2 pillars that were directly in the river. However, they didn't riprap around pillar 4, as it was buried deep in the sandbank and would only occasionally be subjected to being underwater, for example during times of flood. But in that 1981 photograph, we can see that most of that sandbank is gone. Pillar 4 in its foundation are just totally exposed to scour whenever the river is just flowing normally. So, what happened? Where did that massive sandbank go? Well, unsurprisingly, the answer is money. Sand extraction is big business along the Douro River, and Entro's Rios position at the confluence of the Douro and the Tamega made it a particularly good location for extraction. Where these rivers converge and the water slows near the south bank, the sand settles out, creating the huge sandbank that you see in the old photographs and making extraction here very easy. During the 1950s, 60s and 70s, rampant and uncontrolled sand dredging had lowered the riverbed in some places by as much as 8 metres. Now this altered the flow of the river, and ultimately helped to destroy the large sandbank which had protected Pillar Number 4. The Portuguese Institute of Navigation recognised the risk that this posed, and in 1998 they finally imposed a ban on sand extraction in a 10-kilometre stretch of river upstream from the Hintze Ribeiro bridge. But this was probably too little, too late. It was said that many dredgers simply ignored this new rule anyway and carried on extracting the sand regardless. Despite the pleas of the town residents who could see with their own eyes the damage being done to the old bridge and reports from structural engineers, nobody in power acted to halt the illegal dredging or to curtail the movement of the sand barges which regularly bashed into the old granite supports of the bridge. And on that wet, windy and cold night in March, the chickens came home to roost. Undermined by decades of erosion and scour, it was Pillar 4 that toppled over into the river, taking with it most of the central road span and the lives of at least 59 innocent people. The day after the collapse, the Minister of Social Infrastructure, veteran socialist Jorge Coelho, resigned, stating that he was taking responsibility as his conscience wouldn't permit him to remain in his post. The role of illegal sand extraction was mentioned in the news at the time and was highlighted as the most probable cause of the collapse. After all, the pillar fell upstream into the river, something which was only possible if the foundation had been scoured away from below. 6 civil engineers were charged with negligence for their failure to highlight the obvious degradation of the bridge, but in the event, all 6 were acquitted. In the words of the news report, no one is thus liable or criminally responsible for the largest road accident in Portugal. In the end, not 1, but 2 new bridges were built following the tragedy. The opening ceremony for the replacement bridge was attended by all the top brass of the government. Prime Minister Durão Barroso put on a sad face for the cameras and threw a wreath into the river, before they all headed off for a 5-course meal paid for, of course, by the taxpayer. A memorial to the victims, the Angel of Portugal, stands at one end of the new bridge, above a small chapel dedicated to the 59 victims. In what could be considered a somewhat ironic sense of symbolism, recent photographs of the angel show it too looking somewhat tatty, degraded and neglected, just like the former bridge that once stood below it.